The night I chose my daughter over my family. I am a cardiologist. My entire professional existence revolves around the simple, relentless rhythm of a beating heart. I have spent years learning how to keep people alive, how to read the warning signs before a body gives out, how to act fast when every second counts. But nothing in all my medical training, not a single textbook or emergency rotation, ever prepared me for what I walked into that Christmas evening. Nothing taught me how to respond when the people who were supposed to love you, unconditionally, decide that a 7-year-old child deserves to be publicly humiliated and left hungry in the corner of a room, while everyone else laughs and eats and sings holiday songs in the background. That Christmas was supposed to be different. In my line of work, holidays are more myth than reality. You hear other people talk about family dinners and Christmas mornings and New Year's countdowns the way you hear people talk about places you've never visited. You know they exist, but they don't exist for you. I had accepted that reality long ago. Cardiology doesn't pause for the calendar. Hearts don't wait for convenient moments to fail. So I work the shifts that other people avoid, I cover the holidays, and I carry the weight of that without complaint. That year, however, something unexpected happened. A colleague of mine, a man I had quietly done a favor for months earlier by covering his Thanksgiving shift, came to me a few days before Christmas with a simple offer. He told me to go home. He said I had a daughter, and she deserved to see her mother on Christmas Day. He would handle my patience. He was giving me the gift of time. I decided to surprise everyone. No phone calls, no warning texts, no announcement. I would simply show up at my parents' house the way people used to do before everyone became tethered to their devices, the way family was supposed to work. I pictured the look on Ruby's face when she saw me walk through the door. I imagined her running toward me, arms outstretched, voice full of the kind of joy that only a child can produce. I had been rehearsing that moment in my head the entire drive over. What I actually walked into was something else entirely. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside, and the first thing I registered was the chaos. The Christmas tree was leaning at a dangerous angle, half its ornaments either cracked on the floor or hanging by broken threads. There was food ground into the carpet, a tablecloth covered in stains, and the general wreckage of what looked less like a holiday gathering and more like the aftermath of something violent. And yet, impossibly, everyone was seated at the dining table, calm and comfortable, forks moving, laughter flowing, Christmas music drifting through the air as if the destruction around them was simply part of the scenery. My parents were there. My older sister Bianca sat next to her husband, her son Nolan beside her with his angelic 9-year-old face carefully arranged into an expression of innocence. My brother Logan was deep in some story, his wife smiling, his daughter Piper sitting politely at the table. Everything looked festive and warm and completely, horrifyingly normal. My daughter Ruby was not at the table. I asked what had happened. The room went quiet. My mother flinched slightly, the way she always does when she knows she has done something she cannot entirely defend. Bianca set down her fork. Everyone stared at me. Then my mother spoke, her voice flat and unapologetic, and she told me that the mess was Ruby's doing. She said it the way someone might report a minor inconvenience, a broken dish or a spilled drink, something unfortunate but ultimately unimportant. When I asked where Ruby was, Bianca gestured down the hallway with the kind of casual indifference you might use to wave away a fly. I walked down that hallway, I turned the corner, and I stopped. My daughter was standing in the corner of the next room, pressed against the wall as if she were trying to disappear into it. She was 7 years old, and she was wearing a fancy Christmas dress that was now torn and dirty, and there were scratches on her legs that had clearly been left untreated. She was crying quietly, the kind of crying that comes after you have already cried so much that the sound has run out. When she heard my footsteps and turned and saw me, something broke open in her face. She ran to me. She buried herself against my legs and held on with both arms and sobbed out one single word. "Mommy." I scooped her up and held her close and asked her what had happened. That was when I saw it. Across her forehead, written in thick black permanent marker, was a single word: liar. Around her neck, hanging from a piece of string, was a cardboard sign: Family Disgrace. I stood there in that hallway holding my trembling child, and I genuinely could not process what I was seeing. I thought for a moment that exhaustion had finally caught up with me, that I was experiencing some kind of stress-induced hallucination brought on by too many overnight shifts and too little sleep. But the marker on my daughter's forehead was real. The cardboard sign was real. The scratches on her legs were real. The tears soaking into my shoulder were real. I carried Ruby back into the dining room and stood before my family. They were still eating. My father was sipping from his glass. My mother was finishing her dessert. Logan was resuming his story. Jingle bells played softly from a speaker somewhere on the counter. My daughter, pressed into my side and still shaking, wiped her tears with her sleeve because nobody had thought to give her a tissue. I said with a voice that I had to work very hard to keep controlled, that I could not believe what I was seeing. That they were sitting here, eating and laughing, while my child stood in another room with words written on her face and a sign hung around her neck. Nobody looked at me directly. My mother took a slow sip of her coffee. What happened next was a conversation I will carry with me for the rest of my life, not because of anything profound that was said, but because of what was not said. Bianca launched into her explanation with the confidence of someone who believed completely in her own righteousness. She told me that Ruby had destroyed Christmas, that the tree had been knocked over, food spilled, dishes broken, that Ruby had tried to blame Nalan, which made her a liar, and that liars needed to be taught consequences. My mother agreed. My father, without looking up from his plate, muttered something about responsibility. Logan nodded along like a courtroom spectator who had already decided the verdict before hearing the evidence. Ruby, pressed into my side, kept saying through her tears that it wasn't her, that Nalan had pushed her. When I said this directly to Bianca, she dismissed it instantly. Her son was a witness. Her son had seen what happened. Her son would never lie. And when I asked why everyone automatically believed a 9-year-old boy over a 7-year-old girl, Bianca flushed and told me not to accuse her child. I took out my phone. I photographed everything. Ruby's face, the sign, the scratches on her legs, right there in front of all of them. My father asked what I thought I was doing. I told him I was documenting because tomorrow they would all pretend none of this had happened. I knew this from experience. I had been watching them rewrite history my entire life. I tried to remove the sign and wipe the marker from Ruby's face. The marker would not come off. Her skin was red and raw, and she flinched away from my touch because they had pressed hard enough to hurt her. I turned back to my family and said, as clearly and carefully as I could, that even if Ruby had knocked over the tree, even if she had broken every dish in the house and ruined every decoration and set the carpet on fire, it would never make this acceptable. Writing on a child's face was not discipline. Hanging a sign around a child's neck was not a lesson. Leaving a 7-year-old hungry in a corner while the adults ate Christmas dinner was not teaching anyone anything except how cruelty works. My mother stood up. She told me I was too soft. She told me I coddled Ruby, that I never punished her properly, that this was exactly why my daughter misbehaved. She said they had done the right thing. She said it with her chin raised and her voice steady and her eyes completely cold. Logan added that Ruby needed to remember this lesson. I told him she would. I promised all of them that she would remember, and so would I. Then Ruby tugged on my hand and whispered something that stopped my breath entirely. She said she was hungry. She had been standing in that corner for hours and nobody had fed her. They had sat down to a full Christmas meal, passed the turkey and the mashed potatoes and the pie, poured drinks, told jokes, played music, and not one of them had thought to give a child something to eat. Something inside me went very quiet and very certain in that moment. I was done talking. I was done explaining. I was done waiting for understanding from people who did not want to understand. I helped Ruby into her coat, buttoned it all the way up, took her hand and walked toward the door. My mother called after us, offering to let Ruby eat in the kitchen. I didn't answer. Before I stepped outside, I turned and looked at all of them one last time, seated at their table with their full plates and their holiday music, and I said that Ruby was not guilty, but even if she had been, they had no right to do what they did to a child. I told them they would remember this night. We walked out into the cold. Snow crunched under our feet. I lifted Ruby into my arms and carried her to the car. She whispered again that she was hungry. And that was the moment I understood exactly what kind of night this truly was, not because of the marker or the sign or the scratches or even the cruelty, but because my little girl had spent her Christmas asking for something as simple and basic as food, and the people who were supposed to love her had decided she didn't deserve even that. At home, I fed her properly. Turkey, mashed potatoes, a slice of warm apple pie, hot cocoa in her favorite mug. She ate with the kind of urgency that broke my heart a little more with every bite. After dinner, I ran her a warm bath, and afterward I tucked her into bed and pulled the blanket up to her chin and sat beside her. I slid my phone under the bed frame with the recording app open. I knew I needed more than photographs. I needed her words, in her own voice, while everything was still fresh and unfiltered. I asked her softly to tell me what happened. What came out was told in a child's broken, hiccuping, exhausted voice, and it was worse than I had imagined. She said Nolan had suggested the ornament looked crooked and told her that she was small enough to reach it easily if she climbed up on a chair. He offered to hold the chair steady while she climbed. She trusted him because he was older and he seemed to be helping. She climbed up. He pushed her. She fell. The tree came down with her. Everything crashed and spilled and broke. She was on the floor hurting when Nolan pointed at her and said she had done it. The adults came running. They were all yelling before she had even gotten to her feet. She told them Nolan had pushed her. Bianca called her a nasty little liar and hung the cardboard sign around her neck. Then my mother uncapped a permanent marker and wrote on her face while Ruby cried and begged her to stop. My father and Logan held Ruby still when she tried to pull away. She said she had been so frightened and so certain that I was not coming, that she had thought about trying to run, but there was nowhere to go. I held her while she cried, and I told her, in the clearest and most deliberate words I could find, that none of it was her fault, not a single moment of it. I told her that what had been done to her was their shame, not hers. I told her she was good and brave, and I was never going to allow anyone to treat her that way again, not ever. We stayed like that until she finally stopped shaking and her breathing slowed, and she drifted off to sleep. I sat beside her in the dark and watched her breathe. And I thought about how I had known, for a long time, what my family was like. I had known, and I had kept bringing Ruby there anyway, kept telling myself that things would be different now that we were all adults, kept accepting their behavior because they were family and family is supposed to mean something. I had been raised to believe that. I had also been raised as the middle child, the one who was always expected to simply manage. Bianca was the golden oldest daughter. Logan was the cherished son, the boy of the family. I was the useful one, the convenient one, the one who did the housework while Bianca studied and Logan played sports, the one who got a practical coat for her birthday while Bianca got perfume and new dresses and Logan got a bicycle. I had clawed my way out through sheer stubbornness and years of brutal work. Medical school, residency, fellowship, cardiology, all of it powered by the knowledge that my value to the world was not determined by my position at a kitchen table. But the family patterns I thought I had escaped had simply waited for me and my daughter. They had done to Ruby exactly what they had done to me, diminished her, dismissed her, decided she didn't matter. The only difference was that I was no longer a child with nowhere to go. I was a cardiologist with a phone full of photographs, a voice recording, and a very clear understanding of what happens when you document things properly. The morning after Christmas, I drove Ruby to my hospital. My colleagues documented everything on an official medical report. The scratches, the bruising on her arms where she had been held still, the marker stains still visible on her skin despite washing. The report was thorough and clinical and entirely irrefutable. Photographs are personal, medical records are evidence. Back home, I sat down at my kitchen table and methodically dismantled every single financial arrangement I had ever made for my family. The automatic monthly transfers to my parents, the ones that covered the gap between their pension and their actual lifestyle, the medical insurance top-ups, the utility payments, the endless stream of unexpected expenses that somehow always found their way to my account. I shut all of it down. Then I called the winter camp, where I had paid the deposit for Nolan's enrollment, and told them the final payment was not coming. They said they would notify the parents. I thanked them and hung up. I called the auto shop where I had agreed to cover Logan's car repair and canceled the payment. Then I went to the drawer where I had stored the holiday gifts I had carefully chosen and paid for weeks earlier. 2 envelopes with Disneyland tickets, one for Bianca's family, one for Logan's. An envelope with a spa hotel booking for my parents. Nolan had been counting down the days. Piper had already drawn pictures of the castle. My parents had quietly asked about transportation arrangements. I sat at my kitchen table and I tore every ticket and every voucher into thin, careful strips, placed the pieces back into their envelopes, and sealed them shut. Then I addressed them and put them in the outgoing mail. The calls started almost immediately. Bianca called first, her voice at a pitch that could have shattered glass, demanding to know what the envelopes meant and where the real tickets were. I told her those were the real tickets, just in a different format. She told me Nolan had been dreaming about this trip for months. I suggested he redirect that energy toward dreaming about honesty. I ended the call. Logan called next, furious in the way men get when they feel they have been publicly disrespected. He told me Piper was in tears. I told him now he had some idea of how it felt when a child cries because of something an adult chose to do. I ended that call as well. A day later, Bianca called again, this time about the camp. She told me the office had contacted her and the final payment hadn't arrived and Nolan would lose his spot if she didn't pay. She said she didn't have that kind of money. I told her that was what parenthood meant. You pay for your own child's activities. She screamed at me. I ended the call. My parents called together on speaker, my mother's voice frozen solid and my father's stiff with wounded dignity, telling me that the transfers had stopped and demanding to know why. I told them the arrangement was over. My mother said I owed them. I told her she had raised an ATM and the ATM was closed. My father called me ungrateful. I told him I had been grateful for years, and that had apparently been interpreted as an unlimited line of credit. Logan called about his car. I told him to take the bus. What struck me, listening to all these calls, was what nobody said. Not one of them asked how Ruby was doing. Not one of them said they were sorry. Not one offered even the most minimal and insincere expression of regret. Every single call was purely and completely about money, about things they were losing, about inconveniences they were suffering. My daughter had stood in a corner with a sign around her neck and words written on her face, and they could not produce a single word of concern for her. What they produced, instead, were accusations. They told me I was cruel. They told me I was abandoning them. They told me I was destroying the family. That was the moment I understood completely, in a way I had never quite allowed myself to understand before, exactly who these people were and had always been. When I paid, I was family. When I stopped, I became the enemy. That distinction told me everything I needed to know. A few days into the new year, I filed a report with Child Protective Services. I brought everything: the photographs, the medical report, Ruby's recorded statement. The caseworker listened to all of it without interrupting, and when I was finished, she told me what I already knew, that what had been done to my daughter met the definition of child abuse, and that she would be opening cases for the households where children lived. CPS visited Bianca's home and Logan's home within the week. I was not there to see their faces when government caseworkers arrived and explained that their families were now under state supervision and that a repetition of this kind of behavior could result in custody proceedings. I didn't need to be there. I knew what their faces looked like when they were confronted with consequences they could not talk their way out of. I also filed a police report. I laid out every detail: who had written on Ruby's face, who had hung the sign around her neck, who had physically restrained a 7-year-old child when she tried to pull away. The police conducted their own investigation. My family called me afterward to report what had happened at the station, not out of remorse, but out of fury. My mother's voice was shaking when she told me they had been questioned like criminals. My father reported that he and Logan had each received fines and official warnings for child endangerment. Bianca and my mother had received larger fines and mandatory parenting and anger management courses. All 4 of them now had permanent records in the system. My mother told me I had disgraced the family. I told her the disgrace was theirs. They had created it. I had simply stopped covering it up. They kept calling for a while after that. Voicemails full of curses and self-pity. Emails blaming me for the neighbors finding out, for the teachers at school looking at them differently, for the reputations they felt they had built and that I had supposedly torn down. I answered one of those calls. I said 4 words: "You earned all of it." Then I stopped answering. The moment that gave me more certainty than anything else came a few weeks later, entirely by accident. I went to pick Ruby up from her art class and arrived a few minutes early. Out front, I saw Nolan holding court with a group of boys his age. He was telling them a story, proud and animated, and I caught enough of it to understand what it was about. He was bragging. He was describing how he had set up the whole tree incident, how he had pushed Ruby, how she had taken the blame, and how he was so good at this that adults always believed him, and he could probably teach the others to do the same thing. He was 9 years old, and he was boasting about manipulation the way another child might brag about a soccer goal. I stood there and listened and felt something I had not expected to feel. Not rage. Relief. Ruby had never once lied to me. She had told me exactly what happened, and I had believed her, and I had been right. The only new information I had gained was confirmation that the problem ran deeper than I had even realized, that a child was learning, in his own home, that cruelty was a skill worth developing. I did not confront him. There was no point. What was done was documented, reported, and recorded. I looked at him for a moment and thought about the adults who had shaped him, and then I went to collect my daughter. That evening, Ruby and I baked cookies together. We argued about whose singing was worse, and we both lost that argument spectacularly. She laughed until her cheeks turned red, real laughter, the kind that fills a whole room, the kind that belongs in a childhood. And sitting there in the warmth of our kitchen with flour on my hands and my daughter laughing across the table from me, I felt the weight of years beginning to lift. Not all at once, not completely, but enough to breathe. We are good now, just the two of us, which turns out to be exactly enough. The family I was born into chose, when given every chance to do otherwise, to be what they had always been. The family I am building with my daughter is something different entirely. It is honest and loud and imperfect, and it is ours. And the tree in our house stands upright, because nobody here pushes anyone down. What do you think? Did I make the right calls, or should I have handled any of it differently? I'd genuinely like to know your thoughts.